again to another artist talk here at Atelier 89 Friday night, and we've had such an amazing from around the Caribbean trying to very few words because when it comes to art, we can talk for hours. Passion and about their work, their very meaningful work, and how inspiring this has been. And tonight, of course, promises to be another wonderful, inspiring night, which we will be presenting Taisha Carrington from Barbados, who is going to be explaining a little bit about her passion and about her meaningful work as well. As you know, we're presenting this program in Caribbean Linked. As you know, this is the 6th version, and we're so excited to have you with us tonight. And we want to thank our generous sponsors, of course, and the co-founders of Caribbean Linked, Atelier 89 here on Aruba. Of course, Fresh Milk Barbados and ARC Magazine for making this possible. The artists have been working very hard on the expo that we have pending, and tonight we are ready to launch Taisha Carrington, who is a Barbadian multidisciplinary artist working in performance, sculpture, body adornment, and also installation. Her work seeks to promote solidarity with the land and also investigate the liminality of life in the Caribbean after colonialism. Taisha received her BFA from Pratt Institute and currently works in Barbados, collaborating with both scientific and also agricultural practitioners to expand her pool of knowledge. Welcoming her tonight, this is Taisha Carrington.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for being here. And as mentioned, so grateful for the opportunity. Thanks to Atelier 89, ARC, and Fresh Milk Barbados. I got to throw in very quickly that this has already been such a transformative experience for me. It's my first residency where everyone else is from the Caribbean. And truthfully, outside of perhaps studying at BCC in Barbados, I can't tell when last I don't think I've ever had an environment like this. So thank you to my peers, my cohort members, and those who have made tonight possible, the whole 3 weeks possible. So we'll dive right in. Okay. I'm going to start by giving some foundational information. So Barbados is an independent island. We're technically surrounded by the Atlantic, but we're part of the Caribbean. And what you see displayed here is a mechanism that a significant amount of my work is based on. That's a desalination, a solar still. And I wanted to give the reference to this so everything else can make sense going forward. Is an emergency device, usually on for everyday use. It's in the event that for some reason they're stranded and don't have access to fresh water. It uses the heat from the sun to evaporate ocean water, separating it into fresh water, and well, you can discard the salt to get fresh water. With that said, so what I'm sharing will be the last 3 years or so of my practice, which was a pretty pivotal work for me. I had just graduated in 2018 with a BFA in jewelry design and metalsmithing, and at the time I had no access to a jewelry studio, and I was definitely not about to stop making work. So I pivoted, and you'll see that the work goes from smaller scale art jewelry type things to bigger performance, installation, and more immersive works. So what we have here is an infinity saltwater still. That's what I call what I've named it. And what I did was take that that first photo I showed you, and I was thinking about of course, the sea being such a significant part of life in the Caribbean. And at this time, I was living in New York, and the homesickness was really starting to kick in. And I know everybody's probably familiar because we've all touched on this in one way or another, but being confronted with returning to our islands. As I mentioned, Barbados as an independent island, that decision was extremely hard because the option to return to wherever you're coming from isn't quite there. we have citizenship in one place that's 166 square miles. So you kind of have to grab hold of opportunities along the way, such as, did you complete school and are you now in a job? Getting married, or just finding ways to gain citizenship or gain legal status to stay in another country outside of Barbados. So I was at that pivotal point, knowing that if I did choose to go home, it was a pretty finite um, decision for at least a couple more years. With that said, thinking about the sea, as I mentioned, I thought about it I thought deeply on its duality. We know so much about the history of the ocean as it relates to the Caribbean and the transatlantic slave trade, but it's also a source of so much happiness for me as we go, frolic, we party on the beach. It's just such a relaxing experience. I started to think of the water on a more micro level, and I thought about breaking it apart. Its main components, fresh water and salt, and together they're kind of deadly if ingested if too much is ingested, hence why that desalination solar still exists. Because if you were stranded in the middle of the ocean, you couldn't drink the ocean water. But if you do separate them, you get two very important um, materials for life, which is fresh water, which we need, and salt, which is also extremely important in the human body. So what this infinity still does is, it was my way of inventing a device that plays on the idea of, when given lemons, you make lemonade. In this case, when given ocean water and a small island, how do I remind myself that even within this unified, complex body represented by the water, I can still separate it and get these two beautiful elements for survival. So I'll show you how the still works. Just 20 seconds, but the difference between this and the one that exists on a boat is it's not an infinite cycle. I wanted this to have a set amount of water. The water is sealed in there, and through a cycle of being in the sun, you would eventually get salt remaining in the center and the fresh water separating out and settling to the bottom. And when that process is over, you can renew it and just eternally have this symbol of reminding you that it's possible to have a new sense of hope and healing within the Caribbean space. So it might look simple, but this work, I spent a very long time obsessing over it, which I think is my way of working. A little bit scientific, a little bit obsessive, but it's really how I transfer my confusion, my anxieties, my energies into something that distracts me, something that doesn't exist, something that I am entirely responsible for conjuring it up, making it, creating it, and just tweaking it continuously until it works. So this slide really just shows you how it started with modeling clay, and then all different versions that I tried, eventually a resin version, and realizing that they're too small. So then I added a larger reservoir at the top, and I'd have to check on this thing at least 3 times a day. And it could only function in the Caribbean. I missed that. Well, in a sunny place with high temperatures, because I tried doing this work in the summer in New York, upstate, and it still was not hot enough. So I was at this time now, in retrospect, I can see I was very invested in making work that can only function in the Caribbean, as you will see with a lot of other projects. And I've grown to like that. It can be limiting because the work doesn't move or exist in other places, or it doesn't function in other places. But I thought it was an interesting way to bring value to just functioning in the Caribbean. All right, so we'll stick a pin in the desalination systems and move on to when I did This is a little later in the year from when I did that work. And somebody mentioned in their talk, you come back and you realize that you're seeing your island with totally different eyes. And I wanted to take the time to kind of rebuild that relation physically by walking around the entire perimeter of the island. And as I go through, combing it, kind of a meditative process, collecting ocean water and also collecting dirt from which I would make clay. And then I would let water evaporate in the clay and end up with salt. But I really was trying a relationship between myself and the elements around me. And it brought me to my first performance, which was called Who Owns the Beach, to participate in me covering myself in this salt that I walked the entire perimeter of the island collected. And it was a way of utilizing the property of salt as a means of, as a preservative or as a healing agent or something that can renew and give life. So I was bringing the idea of the salt not only in the water, but now it's here, and I wanted to be a part of this experience a little bit more. So I covered myself in salt, and I was saying a poem that I had written. Sorry about the pops. I was saying a poem I had written, and when I completed this, I entered the water and pretty much baptized myself. I had now come to terms with the reality of living in the Caribbean, and I wanted to seal this new identity personally and also seal the new ideas I had formed about the land that I was now committing to. At the end of that, I invited others to come along with me if they had something they wanted to kind of preserve, a new state of mind that they wanted to preserve as well. Because the work tends to get stuck in Barbados, because I like to perform them there, I do sometimes do like a follow-on, and in this case, I took some more salt from the walk-in meditations, and this installation was done in New York, and each placard describes where the salt came from and what the purpose for is in our society, and what my new purpose for this space was. Oh, and in the back, you can see the video. It pretty much was a documentary of this entire process, including the performance. So hopping back now to the first work, the salt still. I then I got a little bigger with the work, and I started again taking this kind of scientific approach to figuring out how I could make these closed survival type systems. And by this time, I was also bringing in the concept of the plants representing people. So what you see here is just a sketch, a diagram of what I was aiming for. And now you'll see the amount of times that I tried to finagle and experiment with this process. And this was the first one I made. At this time, I wasn't aiming to make work to like exhibit or something, but I just had this concept that I needed to express. And what this whole body of ecosphere reliquaries, there are about 7 in total, was me changing the positioning of the plant in the system and analyzing what the plant needed for growth. We all know it needs water, nutrients, sunlight, and air. So in this system, like this one, for example, it had access to water from the desalination system. So there's ocean water in the bottom, evaporation happens, it gets fresh water, but it didn't have nutrients or air. The plants did sprout and they did grow a little, but they did remain at a certain height. And as you can see, as discoloration started to happen, they started to function abnormal. They were literally fighting to invent ways to survive in this system that was deficient in oxygen. And I was, whether it was an imagined society or a reflection of what I really was experiencing in the Caribbean, I tried to just play around with what these plants had access to explore my feelings of Barbadian society. So in this one, you can see that they are outside. So in theory, they do have access to air, but again, they're in cotton. They didn't have access to nutrients. These ones eventually did grow and they did get tall, but they were very skinny. this system never ended up working. um, when I tell you like an obsessive process of like making these come things and trying all kinds of things, this was the beginning of the last one, which I then was like, oh, maybe I might be onto something. I increased the size of the water still, so they had plenty water now. They had nutrients and dirt. They had access to oxygen. What are the people gonna do? You know, I gave the people everything they needed, and they grew. The people grew. I would have to go and refill. There was, you know, there was a commitment to this project. I would have to go and put in the salt, the ocean every day in the reservoir here at the bottom, and I would just honestly sit and watch this cycle happen. I had created this microcycle of a bigger thing I wanted to analyze, which was not just society, but also the cycle of weather. And I mentioned that, and it will make more sense in the next work. This system thrived for a while until I needed a break, and I was not able to tend to it every day anymore, and therefore the people died. Following that work, I moved into thinking, you know, the plants were standing in for people in this space, this society I was imagining. But then I wanted to, it still felt distant for me. I know it catered to my needs at the time of kind of putting over my anxieties, but by now I was settled into Barbados. This is 2020, and I was kind of at peace. So I started to feel more of a relationship with the plants around me, and symbiosis was based on you saw previously, but now I wanted to bring my physical self into the equation. And what I'm doing here is at the bottom again, you can see there's a reservoir where I would have to fill with ocean water. And I can't remember if I mentioned this earlier, but all throughout these works that deal with salt, I came to learn of the theory proposed by an author, Christina Sharp, about the residence time of human bodies in water. And based on the similar composition of a human body, salt and water, and ocean, salt and water, it takes thousands of years for those bodies to separate. She then proposes that that means the bodies of our ancestors who would have fallen overboard in the transatlantic slave trade are still present in Caribbean waters. So with this work, I was pulling on history. I was dealing with my current state, focusing on my environment as a country that is really on the front line for climate change. So very aware that I am committing to a place that in, you know, overnight could be literally ripped apart. And I would have to go through this whole navigation of finding a place I want to settle again. So I thought, and in this system, introducing my own sweat water. So what happens is I get in this box. It's kind of a meditative process for me. And I sit there for about 20 minutes until I sweat. The sweat eventually leaves my body, joins with the ocean water. Evaporation happens. It all flows down these tubes into, oh, well, yes. Here's a bit of the sweat collecting. And this is a picture of the interior of the box. But it all flows down into this reservoir, which then feeds a plant. So this plant was entirely reliant on my commitment to it, kind of flipping a role reversal on my reliance on my environment for food, for shelter, for protection, and for my mental for happiness. I chose to plant a whitewood tree, which usually grows all over Barbados, and because it's a symbol of resilience, and it's also an antidote for manchineel. I think you're all familiar with the manchineel, the most poisonous tree there is. Whitewood is the antidote for that. So I wanted to grow a tree that was not just resilient, but a very powerful antidote for something poisonous on the island, a plant that's poisonous on the island. This work is ongoing. It was unfortunately damaged in a hurricane that Barbados had last year. And then to really just bring it home, the ashfall that happened also, timeline is blurred at this point. The work plastic was destroyed and it kind of fell apart. But my hopes are to eventually grow this tree and give it a final home to continue its life. It's likely going to outlive me. We'll face the climate change together, and we'll just hopefully I can take inspiration from the tree on how to navigate Barbados when these when these systems happen. Yes, and I showed you that one before. Oh, I'm not a big sweater, so this project really literally takes everything from me. I can survive in this Aruban heat, and I will not break. So when I'm in this box, I'm just like giving it my all, like, come on, sweat. But I do eventually get some sweat going. And I should say, my sister, a medical practitioner, and she monitors me because it really gets your heart rate up. You know, not a dangerous level, but it's a very intense physical demand on the body. So I'm gonna skate through these last ones really quickly. Musical chairs, a game of chance, is a performance and still an ongoing project that I install around the Caribbean. So I do works that do move outside of Barbados, but they stick in the region, and it's a way of know the region that I what this work was about exploring the fragility of these spaces, as I've covered in other works. And it's based on musical chairs, which I'm sure we all know how to play. And I wanted to use that as a metaphor for the islands, imagining each island as a chair. And if I was a giant or something, or we were all giants playing musical chairs. And one by one, the islands are out. And in this case, when I say out, I mean thinking of hurricanes. It has happened to at least 5 in recent times, and knowing that Barbados is due of, when will this be the case for. I went around after inviting others to build these chairs with me to have a discussion about our response, like just where we are at in the climate crisis as people trying to build our own individual lives. And while doing this, I was singing. After building them, I went around by myself and one by one sat on each chair while singing a song by local artist Gabby, which it's about displacement. It's called I quote it here. You tell me to forget. So I'll just, for time's sake, I wouldn't go through this, but it's really about displacement. And then every time I sat, I would interject with a reading from our prime minister or someone with someone who we were all familiar with. Should go back to this one. Was I here? Yeah. And these installations are always aimed at conversation. So after I perform them, I interact with those who do attend, sometimes strangers, sometimes people I know. Here is a majority of who came. And we had really wholesome conversation about understanding our place in Barbados. So this work I tried to carry out in different islands. So far, I've done it in 3. This was a tiny chair I built in Bahamas because I was building it alone. I did not have my community. I did not know Ethan at the time. And so I built it alone. And they're they take a lot to build, surprisingly, without crumbling. So it was a small chair. But the last iteration of this work that I really enjoyed was done in Dominica, which, as we all know, was struck by a hurricane in recent years. And that was one of the countries I went to where I could see the aftermath of a hurricane, the renewal of life, like how are people currently living, and what is their life like now, and also talk to them and get firsthand like feedback on what the after of this thing that is kind of pending. So they're like in the future of the timeline that is before me. And just seeing how the island rebuilt itself, how the people rebuilt themselves, and all of this conversation usually happens while building these chairs. Dominica does not have white sand beaches, at least not this part. So we use this stone, which is it's a volcanic island, and these stones are naturally occurring. And the people in this just gather on the beach and help me. Truly a beautiful experience, and everything I hope this project could be as I go around building these chairs on different islands. And in my head, mentally thinking, there's a chair on each island until I complete this larger map of musical chairs. Oh, this is the crew here in Dominica. He was my snorkel guide. I came earlier. He owned a bar there. She was just there with her family, and this is my sister, who's the photographer all along. Okay, so my last work, How to Hide a White Elephant. I start with this picture before I go to the others, so you can have a point of reference. So as you can see, at this point, I'm in New York. I frequently have to go there for, as we all know. And what I wanted to do, my feelings of Barbados being my white elephant. What a white elephant is, by definition, is something that is more of an investment than it can bring you returns. And I've always kind of asked myself, is Barbados my white elephant? Am I investing time, my energy, building a career, like literally investing everything in a space that can never give me the returns that I need to sustain myself? And as I said again, always looming there is the migration, the question of where do I need to go somewhere to survive? Where would that place be? So in this bag is the white elephant. At the time, I was staying with my auntie. She's lived in New York all her life, my mom's sister. And I stay with her when I'm in New York. And I set out from her house with the white elephant in my bag. And I was intending to go to Central Park and start the installation. From the time I stepped out of her front door and I started rolling, and I was just hearing the wheels of the pull along. And I realized in that moment that the performance had started, and that I was kind of masking, like art does. I was really masking that it was about me, even though I wanted to think it was representing a little of the Barbadian or the Caribbean immigrant experience. It was strictly about me. I was rolling and I went to the train station, got on the train, and all this while I'm thinking that these are the elements that kind of make me uncomfortable living in New York, which was the place I chose not to live. I didn't like the feeling of being alone. I didn't like looking at other immigrants. It always felt so heavy for me. And being in Brooklyn with immigrant population in Brooklyn are Caribbean people, I see challenges they face, and it's not something I wanted for myself, to be honest. And sitting on the train, the train was always such a heavy space. Like everybody would be so robotic in everything they had to do. And I know we all know that feeling of just not having that warmth of the Caribbean. And again, pulling up to Central Park alone, I had a little bit of food with me, the elephant in the bag, and I just started pumping it up. And this was a very physically demanding. I clearly like that. It's physically demanding artwork. And all along, I was doing that Bajan thing of being kind of afraid. Is the word. I kept thinking somebody move this elephant or to stop doing what I'm doing. Nobody cares, nobody cares. But I couldn't fight this feeling of being afraid or timid to like inflate this life-sized white elephant. But again, as I realized this work was strictly about me, I overcame this fear, and over several hours, I think the performance was about 8 hours long, I continued to inflate this elephant. Around 5 o'clock, I think I got there around 10 in the morning. Around 5 o'clock, a fellow Barbadian joined me, Vonley Smith, and he just came, took pictures. He New York at the time, but he also lives in Barbados, and we talk all the time about the challenge of being a creative in the space or just being a person in the space. And again, these works really are there to facilitate conversation about the topics they're discussing. This lady, she is from, I want to say Colombia, a South American country. Yes, and she stopped by. The only person that stopped that day, people looked, but nobody stopped. And she was like, "Can I do it?" And I was like, you know what? Even if it was just this one person that stopped and we had the conversation, it was somebody outside of the Caribbean space, and we had this exchange. In that, there was, the conversation on immigration. There was so much that I came to learn and appreciate. And just pictures of me interacting with the elephant, trying to control it from the wind. And I do have a picture. This is the last picture, but there's a video, like a 20-second video. I'll play with it. Joining me here, as you see, nighttime now, was a really close friend, Ada. We went to college together in New York. And a person I met recently who is born in Barbados, but permanently living in New York now. So again, and Ada is first generation Chinese American. So we had these multiple perspectives on what it takes to migrate specifically to the US and what it means for us leaving other things behind. And the last video. I forgot to show you the video on the reliquary, but we're going to go to the elephant. And this was just at the end of the day after we were discussing choices, and they just helped me deflate the elephant. And I forgot to mention, I was posting continuously to Instagram for this project. I'm not a big Instagram person, but this is the first project where I felt like through Instagram was an important part of it, because there was so much encouragement via Instagram, although it was in Central Park, all by myself for a very long time. So many people were messaging me, encouraging me all along the way of making this project. And then we packed it all up. I put it back in my suitcase, and I've taken the elephant is here with me, as some of you have seen, and I take it around to any place that I consider migrating to. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Taisha. We're going to open the floor for any questions directed towards her. All right, let's start with Catherine.
Hi, Taisha.
Hello.
So, I mean, first, just as a fellow Barbadian, just appreciation for so much of what you said, resonating in a very specific and particular way. So, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
And I guess I have two questions. One is like a very practical question, just in terms of like how you construct, for example, this piece you have here on the slides right now. Just your kind of precision and scientific approach, and then how you plan and implement these projects. I'm just very interested in their construction and how you do this scientific methodology around your work. And the second question is something else that we've talked about quite a lot, and that you touch on in your white elephant work in a way. But so much of your work is so embedded in Barbados and in the Caribbean. So in this kind of thought of migration and leaving this space that, as hard as it is, has really fed your practice, have you thought about the different trajectories you can take? And I know that you've started to do that with the white elephant work and looking at other perspectives.
I'll start with the second question. I think along with making the decision to return to Barbados for non-art reasons, to tell the truth, art was a large part of it. For a year, I hadn't really made work. I was struggling to make work for the first time ever in my life. I've made art literally from the time I could hold anything. I've done things. And so I was, for the first time, not making something. I was like, this is weird. I never knew that version. And I had to really consider why it was happening. And I was committed to returning to Barbados to at least execute a significant amount of these artworks. the first performance was done when I hadn't made the final decision, but I was home on summer vacation. But low key, I was really almost home permanently. I just had to go back for a residency. Um, so I think I've started to make works that can travel, like the White Elephant, or that can have life in a different way, whether it be a documentation that's then shown after. So I'm aware that the work has to leave Barbados, but for now, I feel like it's important that I make it there because there's so many questions that I'm answering for myself that is based on being in the space. And that's not to say that there won't be a ton of questions when I am outside this space, but I had already had the space and time to answer those questions living there in New York for 5 years. I needed to spend some of my adult years on the flip side. In terms of making the work, it's a ton of trial. That's why there is like 8, 10, 9 billion iterations of something. But I think I mentioned it. I come to realize it's my way of having something to, like, those stress balls or a fidget spinner, something that completely distracts you from reality in a way, is why I take such a scientific approach. As I said, these works are demanding. You don't have time to think about anything else. Like, I have to be going up on my roof in the sun at least 7, 8 different times a day, make sure the water is there, make sure the plants aren't overheating, all of this. So it was really therapeutic for me to invest in these works. And the materials really come down to what I have access to in Barbados. So in this way, this is acrylic because Koiman sells acrylic, thankfully, and a ton of buckets or anything I can find at hardware stores. And I usually just kind of sketch and then build it from there based on the properties of the materials.
All right, wonderful.
Hey, what's up?
Hi.
Catherine beat me. I was trying. Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting because we never really got to talk much about because me, you, and Justin all flip flopped on a day.
Hmm.
So I didn't know that your work had such a scientific level to it,
Hmm.
which I find really interesting. But Catherine pretty much asked the question I was going to ask. So my second question was, though, are you going to be making a chair in Aruba? And if so, do you want our help?
Hmm. I know.
Oh.
I have thoughts on that from the time I knew I was coming to this residency. I thought this is a perfect time. I have artists, because as you see, the chairs look a particular way, not only because of the physical limitations of sand, but also, who is it? I'm pulling any and everybody to help me, and I've been curious to know what working with other artists on this project would be. I'm hesitant because Aruba is outside of the hurricane belt, and not somebody, Justin, I think you mentioned that Eagle Beach was rearranged by a hurricane recently. Baby Beach. So when I heard that, I started to reconsider it, but I haven't settled on a thought yet, just because it is outside of the hurricane belt.
So I had a question. Yeah, the reliquary work, right? Could you explain what a reliquary is and why you decided to title that work in particular that?
A reliquary is kind of a memorial or like something that cherishes. It's a space where you can cherish something. Um, a memory of something physical. And while working on this work, I was aware of Christina Sharp's theory on residence time. So I wanted to acknowledge that the water did have more to it than the water. And I wanted to treat it with respect and label it a reliquary because it held something that I cherished, are part of this larger actual body or bodies that are present in the ocean. Mhm.
Do we have any more questions?
Thanks, Taisha, for your presentation. A question, in both or all three of your projects is kind of investigating this sort of the Caribbean as being sort of an inhospitable space, not only for artists, but also maybe being a space where native people from the Caribbean no longer can actually habitate these islands, in a way that's, comfortable or prosperous, in this sense. So, do you see any path forward? Because I see in your explorations with the reliquary and the human beings being sustained through science. I mean, is there a way out? Because I feel in a way also that it's also sort of you've resigned yourself that you have to move away from this space. But I'm curious to see if I mean, at the same time, it's nurturing your work.
Mhm.
Is there something that you see beyond these?
So you did pick up on a very specific feeling in that time, which is a sense of hopelessness. I could say my more recent work is a little bit more celebratory, because I have found ways to survive in this space. So at that time, making over that period of, I was basically moving to what felt like a new country, returning to Barbados. I was finding my footing, finding work or ways to work, or do I need to get a job? Do I need to start my art practice? Can I, pick up on jewelry? So all these larger life decisions that can feel very hopeless were happening simultaneously. And that's why I was kind of expressing it in the work. And I do use the systems kind of to hint at ways of solving a lot of our problems. I think I started to focus on desalination because this is one of the most water scarce countries in the world. And desalination is a solution that we have to look to literally get water to survive. So in that way, I kind of touch on things that I pick up around us. It was expressed in these works in a little bit more, hopeless way. But the works now are evolving to be more of a celebration. I do think there is hope, but the reality is it's really hard. It is really, really hard, particularly in the arts.
Anybody else? Burning questions?
Hello.
Hi.
Maybe this is going to take us in a different direction, but I was wondering because I see a beautiful earring, and I really like the way you interact with people with your work, and I wonder if there is a way to kind of combine the jewelry with this idea of connecting with people, and if you ever thought about that.
Yeah. So I live these two parallel lives now. There's a whole world of art jewelry. It's not like commercially focused, but it essentially tells all these same stories through jewelry. And that is the more celebratory portion of my work because they're festive and, people can have them and they can share in this celebration. But the works, like these ones, for example, are made of conch, which I view as ivory. Like I think about the creolization of knowledge and what was lost across the Atlantic. And what if I could totally erase that and think of Barbados outside of that lens, so bogged down by our history? What if I could imagine that West Africans chose to come to the Caribbean and then they got here with their brilliant skills and, where culture was not removed and found conch shell, not having access to ivory, and was like, this material functions the same way, and how that might have been passed on to us. So with these earrings, I do carve the conch from the perspective of embodying this knowledge that was not removed from us. But that is a whole different, I would have needed a separate presentation for the jewelry. So I didn't incorporate it in this, but it does navigate these concepts similarly.
Anyone else? Round of applause for Taisha. Thank you so much. Congratulations on an amazing presentation.
Thank you.
And that concludes our night. We will be back on Monday with a presentation through Zoom. So be pending of our Facebook page where we will provide the link that you can follow us. And on Tuesday, we will be back here at 7 p.m. in the Black Box. Wishing you a great night. See you on Tuesday or Monday.